Okay, I'm going to get started here. People usually join in the first couple of minutes, but they'll miss all the good stuff. So my name is Don Bowman. My company is Agilicus, and today we're going to talk a little bit about local governments and cybercrime and a specific security strategy called Zero Trust, which is kind of going to help in that area. We'll talk about some of the specific threats and how that strategy can help reduce the impact of those threats becoming real. So just a little bit about us and me. So we are focused on the local government space. We're working with partners serving over 170 local governments today. And a lot of that is around very bread and butter things like water treatment, HVAC systems, trouble ticketing systems, timesheets, pay stubs, bylaw enforcement, things that are sort of loosely associated. They've got a set of users that need to use them, and those users are not core IT users with a laptop and a desk, but they may be contractors, they may be affiliates, etc. And the key is it's a low-cost, zero-trust managed platform that achieves that objective without really having to deploy anything complicated. So the agenda today, we're going to talk a little bit about the common attack vectors affecting local governments. I'm not going to really break any new ground here. I'm going to bring my experience to bear. You have your experience, the news reports on it. We're going to talk a little bit about what a local government can do to defend against cybercrime. And we're talking really here about phishing and ransomware style malware, things that are coming in and then going sideways through it and then affecting privacy, leaks, outages, etc. We're going to talk really about Zero Trust as a strategy and how you can get started incrementally. You don't have to big bang theory it and say tomorrow the world is different. You can say tomorrow that area is better, and that's actually a good thing. We'll talk about how to do that on a fairly limited time, materials, people, expertise budget. So, the cyber threat environment, everybody's got their own numbers for how good, bad, or ugly this is. The reality is it's disproportionately affecting local governments. They have a wide variety of lines of business, clearing snow and putting in bridges and parks. It's very broad compared to the average business, but they also have disproportionately low IT spends compared to, for example, a bank or even a manufacturing company. And that makes them a pretty good attack vector for people to come in and get a little bit of money out of them. And one of the biggest single methods that happens is compromised credentials. It's no secret that a lot of people use the same password on more than one system. They use it on their work and their home, etc., or they write it down. But it's also a little bit less known, but equally prevalent, that there's an explicit shared credential system somewhere in your network. And it could be through a vendor. You might have the shared password for the HVAC system, the building management system, the lights at the hockey rink. It could be the water treatment plant, and there's a TeamViewer account that's used by the company you work with. And this is the key you're looking for here when there's credentials for a company, but not a person. And those are very difficult because what if they have turnover in their staff? What if they're sharing that across? That password is very difficult to change because you've got to change it to multiple users, but also it's hard to get multi-factor in there when it's to a company, not a person. And people are starting to wake up to this risk, and there's starting to be specific attack vectors for that risk. The number that we have is the average cost of a cyber breach is $4 and change million. Brand reputation cost, extra staffing time, outage time, consultants, insurance premiums up, and so on. It costs a lot more when those breaches originate within your own workforce. And what Zero Trust is really about, it's about blast radius restriction. So you think about, in the past, I put up a building, I put a fence around the building, I put a guard at the gate, you showed your badge, you walked in, you could do whatever you want once you're in. Outside, you were infinitely bad. Inside, you were infinitely good. In an IT sense of the world, the equivalent of that fence, that moat, was a VPN. And you would say, okay, it's a random laptop on the internet, they can't do anything. Oh, they've VPN'd in, they have access to everything. The problem is that exchanges your security border quite broadly, and when you're talking about VPNing in people that have a single need, my task is to do X on equipment Y, and instead you have access to everything, It means the instant they activate that ransomware, it spreads sideways and bad things happen. It costs a lot more when it originates from your own workforce than if it comes in through some other way. That $10.5 trillion number, I'm sure that's just meant to scare you, but cybercrime is a real industry. It's attracting real talent. It isn't just a couple of hackers here and there. They've got methods and procedures. They've got research. It's a real business, and it's driven by the general thing of capitalism. It gets better over time, and as a blue team, you have to be right 24/7, 365. As a red team, they just need to get it right once. It's disproportionate warfare, and that's why there's so much money flowing there. It's very difficult to defend. So how do they get in? I think for most of you on the call, spear phishing is going to be the number one way. So you've got a team of people that are legitimately helpful. An email comes in and somebody needs help. They spring into action and troubleshooting and problem solving. Oh, my vendor has changed their bank and they need to get the bank number changed on the file. Oh, there's a citizen that has this issue. Let me do this thing. They turn off the suspicious part of their brain and they turn on the helpful part of their brain pretty quickly. And that, coupled with the use of things like Microsoft Office documents with macros, it can go quite quickly. You can also see it with publicly available resources. This is another area. You can often up-level information into spear phishing. I get a little bit of information publicly, and then when I call you or email you and I relay some of that, you're like, oh, well, they do know what they're talking about. So you did an RFP last year for updating the bridge. It's all public because of public procurement. Everybody knows who won it. And somebody calls in and they went to LinkedIn, they figured out who the accounting person is there, and hey, I'm the accounting person at the company with the bridge project X, and because they know that information, they must be real. That publicly available resources, there's lots of it out there. It could be your own website, it could be logging. We've seen some of our customers recently, they were doing fairly innocuous logging, all their systems logged somewhere, but the system with the logs was compromised, but then it had all the access logs, and some of the access logs had credentials or sessions in the URL. Insufficient encryption measures. Encryption is tough. You set it up today and it's perfect today, and tomorrow somebody tells you that there's a new thing and you didn't know about. RC4 is no longer allowed, MD5 is no longer allowed, SHA-1 is no longer allowed, TLS 1.0 is no longer allowed, and it's a moving target, but you have to stay up with it. So people forget, and they end up with a system they didn't consider that important. Well, it's just a laptop that's associated with this system. It's not really there's no real data on it. It's not encrypted, which means that the evil maid attack, somebody can plug a USB key into it, it gets something on there, and then you come along and then you run that executable with your permissions and you're inside the network. And then that segues to the last one, the poor user controls. User controls are also tough. Nobody wants to say you can't do this thing that you need to do for your job. So you like to err on the side of going broad. If everybody was an admin on everything, it would be a lot more efficient. Of course it would. Nothing would ever, be secure. Getting into tight-grained user controls, it starts to frustrate. A lot of us remember when Microsoft launched UAC back in the day, and there was a lot of complaints on Windows XP. Somebody would open something, and did you really want to do it? And they were always just clicking yes, 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 yes. We see that fatigue in other areas. Multi-factor is another area of fatigue, and it becomes possible to phish someone through multi-factor because they click yes on everything. So their phone chirps, it's SMS, they yes. Those poor user access controls, if you put a system in place that's easy to use and achieves that objective, then you increase your security. And that's the key. You got to really make it easy for the person to use. And you have to realize that most of the users are task-based users. They're not IT administrators who are comfortable with an SSH port forward, open a VPN, yada, yada, yada. They're more click a browser and do a thing. If you can make it work like everything else and make it work simply, everything's just its own URL, everybody's login is always the same, there's no new credentials, it's single sign-on, then you can really get into good user controls, and that makes the cyber criminal's life difficult. If you get rid of the shared credentials, you use single sign-on for everything, and you have a restricted blast radius, then your cyber criminal can't really go anywhere. So what's putting you at risk? I posit that the number one risk you have is shared credentials. There's a system that doesn't participate in your single sign-on domain. It could be a router, it could be a voice switch, it could be the security thing for the door, It could be a PLC in a water treatment plant running the HMI for how much chlorine. It could be the lights at the pool. It could be a Wi-Fi access point. But there's something out there with that shared credential. It's locked in its firmware, and it's written on a piece of paper or in some sort of LastPass type tool. And there's somebody that knows it that used to work for you. They don't work for you anymore. And there's somebody that knows it that works for a vendor of yours, and they don't work for that vendor anymore. And you can't easily change that password, so you don't. And that employee turnover, it's leaking, right? So they may not be doing it on purpose. It might not be that ex-employee is malicious. It's maybe just that they've got in the habit of using that password at their new customer or new site, or maybe it's been written down somewhere else, and suddenly it's in a dictionary and somebody's able to do a brute force attack and they're in. The problem is people tend to think about how unimportant that thing is. Well, they just got into the Wi-Fi access point at the pool. There's nothing. It's not like there's data stored on that thing. But lateral traversal, I can walk from there. I can just change the VLAN tag and be on the other VLAN. Oh, now I'm not on the guest VLAN. I'm on the corporate VLAN. Okay, well, there's a hard wire from here back to City Hall. Okay, well, now I've got an IP address that accesses stuff in City Hall. Okay, well, now I run Nmap. Oh, what did I find? I found 3 other hosts on here that have interesting names that seem to use the same password that I just learned from this other device because it got shared. That shared credential system is risky. If you can put in place a system that gets rid of it systematically, even on those devices that don't participate, and that's what I propose. I propose an identity-aware proxy. It allows you to do SSH with multi-factor to a device that you can't really upgrade. It allows you to do a share, a directory full of files, without having to bring it into OneDrive or SharePoint to external entities that may not have an account with you without having to make it a shared account. That multi-factor authentication, I'm a firm proponent. It's your best bang for your buck. Multi-factor authentication, all users, all applications, all the time, no matter where you are. Doesn't matter whether you're at work or at home. Just make that work, and don't use SMS for it. Never use SMS. Just use a YubiKey, use biometrics, use one-time codes, TOTP, but avoid using SMS because people are phishing your phone number. They are going to T-Mobile and saying, hey, it's Don, lost my SIM card, gonna get a new one. They ask you the security question. The security question is coincidentally on your Facebook profile. What's the name of your grandmother's pet? Bam, you're in. So that's what's putting you at risk is these things. It's also that all or nothing mentality. You know, I think a lot about, when I think about firewalls, I think of the human body and I think of my skin. So this is my firewall. This is what keeps me from getting killed by bacteria is they bounce off my skin. But if I get scratched, I don't die. It's because I have white blood cells. So things go to work, multiple levels. It's called defense in depth as a strategy. So what you want to do is to think about, let's make layer A as strong as we kind of can with reasonable cost and time, but then assume that somebody will get through layer A and go to layer B. Reduce the blast radius, so the criminal's going to get into the first thing, make it longer for them to get to the second layer, make it more visible when they get to the second layer, but assume they're going to get past your first layer. If you get rid of that all or nothing mentality, and you say, well, the VPN's gone, we've got single sign-on, we've got multi-factor, now I don't have to worry about once they're in, they have everything. Once they're in, they're working hard to move sideways, I've got time. And time becomes a good thing for me. And traditionally, you know, this was the model. You know, in the sort of late '90s, the VPN came online from a person standpoint. Before that, you dialed into your work with the phone network, which is something I remember doing. But after that, you know, the VPN came in. You'd be in a hotel room and be one of the first hotels that had some sort of internet in the room, and you'd never be able to figure what that was. You had that little PCMCA card with the Ethernet jack, and you have to plug into some sort of cable modem looking thing under the table, but you'd VPN back home, and it was like you were in your corporate network, and everything just worked. That's not good enough anymore. We can't do that. It doesn't work for task-based workers. It doesn't work when you have that outside vendor. You can't have them VPNing into you, because I'll tell you what, they VPN into other people just like you, and what they've done is they've made a virtual machine that has always on access to you, and they just share it willy-nilly inside their org. And they have to for their own sanity, because every one of you has a different method, and they just can't get all the software installed on people's laptops. And that VPN becomes a risk. It becomes a boat anchor. So the VPN has other downsides to it as well. When you VPN in, you often end up changing your routing table, and you end up with things like Teams and Google Meet and so on having reduced performance because the video goes into your network and then back out and in and back out. It halves the bandwidth. But really, that VPN, what's risky about is it has a single set of credentials that once compromised go to everything. The VPN often is the worst citizen for participating in your single sign-on. It's the hardest thing to do. And then once they're in, they just keep walking sideways. So we think that it's not a good approach. Instead, Zero Trust, we treat each user, resource, permission as a triplet and make that access as if the resource was on the public internet. That's where it came from. Zero Trust. If my application was running on the network at Starbucks, there was nothing I could trust. What would I do differently about it? That's what Zero Trust is about. So trusting and verifying. I guess that's back to quoting Reagan. I want to trust it, but I want to verify. I want an audit trail. So when I talk about Zero Trust, we're back to the idea of how to defend against a cyber criminal. These are the three disciplines. The first is I call it the who problem. Who is that person? In the past, who always meant a new password. Oh, there's a new system coming in. We're implementing PeopleSoft. Here's your PeopleSoft username and password. I can tell you the number of cities I've been in a meeting room and people have opened their logbooks and the first page of the logbook has a Post-it note in it and it has the 12 systems that they were given on the first day they started there, which might be years ago, and the Post-it note's been moved. That who problem. Every one of you has done great things, and every one of your partners have done great things with identity in the last couple of years. So most of you now will either use Google G Suite or Microsoft Azure. Most of your partners will as well. Some of them will use other identity systems like Amazon Incognito or Okta or Auth0, but usually there's a single identity system involved. It might still be Active Directory, Active Directory Federation, but they all have that same property where there's a spot. If you fire somebody, I've got one spot to get rid of them. If I have to turn on multi-factor authentication, I got one spot to do it. Now the question is getting everything to trust that. And usually, as corporations, we focused on the idea of my identity system, my users, my system, and it excluded everybody else, the digitally disenfranchised. Well, screw my partners. They got their own Azure Active Directory. They can't sign in. I'll create a guest account for them. I'll create a vendor dash or partner dash. It's terrible because now when they have staff turnover, you don't know. It doesn't get changed out. If you can federate that identity so that everybody signs in with their natural credentials or natural method, it's the strongest protection against spear phishing. If the user always sees the same HTML page with the same logo the same way for everything, it's really hard to spear phish them. If they're used to seeing random boxes on web pages with text boxes and typing in passwords, it's hard to protect them. No amount of training is going to make that easy. So if you can fix that who problem, we use a protocol called OpenID Connect or another one called SAML. Those are the two big dogs in the space. Nearly everything supports those today. For those that don't, we do it on their behalf with an identity-aware proxy, so the user sees that simple single sign-on, and then that router with SSH sees what it needs to get that end-to-end experience, good for the user, good for the security. So that's the who problem. The second problem is the what problem. What are you allowed to do? And this is, a lot of people have a hard time, the difference between authentication, who you are, and authorization, what you're allowed to do. But the reality is, you're willing to outsource who to those identity providers. My partner uses Azure. I believe they hire the right people. Therefore, if one of their users logs in with Azure, I'll believe they are who they say they are. But I own what they're allowed to do. They're not allowed to log in after hours. They're not allowed to do this or whatever. That's authorization. That's the what. And that's where we come in, an identity-aware firewall operating on that multiple federated identity sources, but then controlling what it is. That needs to be in your discipline and control. And the last part is then how you get there. And this is something, there's no right answer for every site. We've tried to make this easy. Sometimes you have a site that doesn't have inbound IP addresses. Maybe it's behind a site or modem and NAT or Starlink or something like that. Outbound only, port 443 only, no inbound needed, and then it just works end to end and everybody's happy. So that's what Zero Trust is in a nutshell. If you get the who, the what they're allowed to do, and the how you get there, and you do that on a per user resource pair basis, you have implemented Zero Trust. So there's lots of different architectures out there for it, and some of them are very, very detailed, and some of them use client certificates, and some of them just use access tokens. I don't think there's any one right answer for everything. There's no panacea, but that's what Zero Trust is in a nutshell. I know who you are, I know what you're allowed to do, and I know where you're going per resource, not all at once, not for the whole network. So the challenge then comes in, how do I roll this out economically? How do I roll this out without big bang changing the world? How do I roll this out to my staff, equally to my vendors, equally to my partners? I don't want to disenfranchise them. I don't want to make them have a bad security experience and then them write the password down. If I roll out multi-factor, everybody gets it at once. No shared credentials. Every person signs in with their native credentials, not the ones I created for them they had to write down, not the ones that are shared across the entire vendor. Simplify that experience by trusting their identity provider and then authorizing what they're allowed to do and then giving them that access. If you solve that challenge, you've increased your security, you've increased the usability of your system, you've decreased the chance that cybercrime is going to come to your local government. There's a lot of standards out there. The big dog in the space is NIST. In 2019, NIST published their first set of standards around zero trust, and this has become the gold standard all the way up and down the stack. Federal government, military, local government, bank, manufacturing. NIST has a substandard of the substandard for everyone. I gave you the nutshell of what it said, the who, the what, the how. There's more stuff in there. It talks about what strength you need for identity. Identity, is it just a username and password and an unknown person, or have you verified their passport? Have you done a security background check? Do you have a fingerprint on file? There's a big gamut there, but it's still the same concept. And there's a set of draft executive orders ordering the hardening of everything. I noticed as we started this, there's going to be a new labeling for Internet of Things devices. This is something I've been pushing for a long time. Just like Energy Star, where you could say this dishwasher uses this much energy, you'll be able to go into a store and say this router is going to have support for this many years and so on. It's all coming under this standards bodies here, and there's a risk management framework and risk assessment framework that goes beside it. And they're not that complicated tools to use. They are designed, there's a right-sized tool for each organization. So in the risk framework, for example, there's sort of small, medium, and large, if you will. And the large ones require a lot more resources, but you have a lot more resources. The small ones are doable with sort of a two-person team. The way we do zero trust, it's the same concept, that who, the what, the how. In a nutshell, we accept the existing identity providers. We say everybody's going to log into your network is going to use either Azure or Google or an Apple ID. And that's key. We allow that to be a personal ID. It doesn't make it less strong because you still control what they're allowed to do, but it means that you can work with an individual MSP that's a single person. You can work with someone, you're doing a new launch to your website and there's a marketing resource, you've outsourced HR for something, you're doing an audit of something, whatever. You're working in conjunction with social services in the area. You can say, person at Gmail can access this thing, this share, this file, this remote desktop, this SSH, and you get to control and audit that. That centralized authorization management, that's what you control with a system like ours. You got one spot to go and put all your rules in and say, this person can edit my web page. And then the last is that identity-aware web application firewall. That's how it gets back into your resource, whether your resource is already in the cloud, like Azure, or it's on your premise in your data center, or it's in your partner center, or it's an outside plant. It's in that pool house or water treatment facility somewhere out of town. So I'm going to do a very, very brief demo, and then we'll come back to the cybercrime in the local environment. So to do that, I'm just going to share my screen here. Share entire screen. Okay, so the first thing I'm going to do is I'm just going to show a user that's already signed in the full experience. So my take on the world is everybody's got a browser. Everybody understands a browser. We've come to grips with how to secure the browser by this stage of the game. Edge and Chrome are the same code base. Everybody runs one of those. There's a security update for it quite frequently, which is not necessarily the best thing, but it's good in the sense that they're looking. So if we treat the entire universe as browser-based, it's a good start. I know that not everything can be browser-based and there are other approaches, but I'm just going to focus on that today. So that means that everything's got its own URL. You can bookmark the URLs, you can use it on your mobile phone, you could use it on a tablet, you can use it on any device you want. but the key is you're going to want that simple single sign-on experience. So here I'm showing our profile, which is our launchpad, but you don't have to use the launchpad, and it shows the different things. You can have desktops, remote desktops. I can click on a desktop and, boom, right here, right in the browser, I can access this desktop. And I'm already signed in, so I don't have to sign in again. I'll show you the sign-in experience in a second. But if I go back to the web applications, imagine you've got that most mundane of thing, the wiki, your intranet. It's got your policies and procedures and who reports to who and how to fill in a vacation form, etc. 100% of your staff need this, which means you want to do very little training on how to access it. They want it to be just a web page that just opens. I know you've all seen web pages open, so I won't really focus on this too much, but imagine that you weren't signed into it. Imagine that you were first time on this device, or it's timed out, or your organization requires multi-factor every 10 minutes, every 10 hours, every 2 weeks, whatever you want. So, this would be obviously your branding. I'm showing a way that you can sign in with different identity providers. So here, for the sake of my demo, I allow signing in with your Apple ID, signing in with your Google ID. Google ID can be G Suite or Gmail, so everybody has one of these two, or signing in with any Microsoft account. And this is really key. It's my Azure account, so me at my city, or my partner. My partner might be an MSP, and they might also use Azure, so it'll be them at their domain. They're each going to see their own sign-in experience. Here we use Google G Suite, now called Workplace. So if I sign in with that, I see that single sign-on experience, and I have multi-factor enabled. I can either use code or biometric. I'm going to use biometric. I'm going to use my phone for that, and my phone will chirp here, which it did, and I click on it, and then I use my face, and then you see the browser just logs in, and boom, we're back to that wiki again. So that's a very, very simple example of an identity-aware proxy. The wiki doesn't participate. The wiki is a non-modern piece of software. It's a website that's existed since the last student wrote it in the last administration, and people, they neither love it nor hate it, but it's part of life. And you used to have a kiosk machine in the basement where people could access it when they were drivers. They were truck drivers that did stuff for the city, and they didn't have an account. And all of a sudden COVID came along, and that was difficult to do, and people wanted to use it from their phone and this and that. And you were like, geez, I don't want to roll out the VPN to everybody. And the everybody's kind of broad because I have these contractors. I got summer students in the summer. I got volunteers. And I don't want to create accounts in Active Directory because that's going to cost me money. But I want them to be able to safely sign into it. But it's not really hardened to put on the internet. This is the solution for you. And when I say wiki, you could think SSH. You could think your pay stub portal. You could think any of those bread and butter applications. It could be this HMI. This HMI is super sensitive because it's a water treatment plant. I'm going to force sign in every single time, even though I was already signed in. I just don't want any risk with it. And the same thing, I've got a partner that is helping me with my, the chemicals for my water. Maybe I've got the integrator that did the PLCs that need to log in and change some programming to change the timing on the pumps, and they're lighting them up. And boom, all of a sudden, they can come in. They don't have to VPN into my network. They're not installing TeamViewer or the shared password. And they come in, they're like, let me open that valve, and I'll go change this temperature a little bit. And bingo bango, things start happening, temperature's gone down, everybody's happy. So that's kind of the whirlwind idea, is try to bring everything in a browser where possible. If not, traditional Windows Start menu, but there's a browser involved. By making a browser involved with the sign-in experience, the sign-in is always the same. So even if it's an old Windows FAT client and you, it's like PeopleSoft or something. I just shared the webcam, I'm sorry. Even though it's something old like PeopleSoft or something as a Windows FAT client, in our system, the browser handles that network login. So if it doesn't know who you are, the browser opens. That allows that shared credentials, that single sign-on experience, that multi-factor to be constant. If it's SSH, it still might pop up a browser to do its job. If it's a share, it might still pop up if it's RDP. So the key there is keeping that consistent sign-in experience and methodology. Excuse me. There's a lot of different security measures that you're working on, have worked on, will work on in the future. Zero Trust checks boxes in all of them, but doesn't necessarily solve all of them all at once. Does it enhance your security? Yes. Now you've got strong encryption on everything, no matter what it was. That wiki might not have had encryption. Now there's a perfect certificate. You have to worry about keeping up to date with RC4 and all those other things. Least privileged access. Yes, I'm controlling who can do what, where, and they're not always administrator on it. Multi-factor, yes. No matter how old that application is, we can do multi-factor on it. That SSH into that old router that doesn't participate, boom, I now got a multi-factor onto it. Great, my MSP comes in, they have to do multi-factor, that's what I wanted. My insurance is cheaper because. Resource segmentation, I don't have to worry about, they're in the network, I want them only go here, but they can go here because of the VPN. I got one URL, I was authorized to it, they can't go sideways. It's off the public internet. You can't get to that resource unless you go through this system. You have to sign in through the system. 0 bytes arrive. Imagine how strong a guarantee that is. 0 bytes of data arrive at this network resource, except for users who have a valid identity and valid role on it. It's a lot less worrisome about now pen testing and CSRF and XML vulnerabilities and JavaScript and CVE, because it's just a lot less people can get to it. Very detailed auditing. Every user, cryptographically, every operation, I know who did what, where, when. I don't have to worry about mapping up NAT logs and IP addresses and time ranges. No new users and passwords. It's terrible, the practice of new system equals new username. Nobody wants that. We're only forced to it sometimes. With systems like this, you can be forced to it a lot less often. And no clients. Managing clients on people's devices. It's one thing to say the city issued the laptop. It's another thing to say I'm working with that partner and they got their own equipment, or this is a task-based worker that has only a phone and I need to get in. Oh, suddenly the idea of the IPsec firewall is a little bit hard to manage. How do you step into it? So we're talking about cybercrime and defense and depth and local governments and phishing and zero trust and credentials and all that stuff. It sounds like it's a million things you got to do. The reality is it's not, because you've actually done a lot of them already. You've already got in place that identity system, whether it's called Active Directory, Active Directory Federation, Azure Active Directory, something hybrid mode, G Suite, Apple, ID, whatever. It's there for you. It's there for your partners. It's there for everybody you do business with today. All you need to be able to do is to unify that authentication so that they can sign in with the right set. OpenID Connect and SAML sounds like a lot of work. I'm going to have to go buy the enterprise version of each of my things. You don't. The identity aware proxy will do it on behalf of. That wiki I showed you had 0 integration. 0. It's just the proxy does the authentication, and then the proxy allows connection to the wiki. The user sees the proxy and the wiki as synonymous, but the proxy takes care of this for them. If you're not authenticated, I authenticate you. Where you propose to go, if you don't have a role, I throw you out. If you do, I allow you there with that role. That precise authorization. Here, you've got groups, and you've got group A is allowed to do task B. That's your authorization today for the most part. A system like ours just helps to implement it in one spot. By moving it into the network and out of the edges, you don't have to configure a lot of different systems with a lot of different restrictions. You don't have to figure out how in my new ERP system we're doing Great Plains, yada yada, dynamics, something, something, something. Oh, it works this way. You do a single spot in the network. And then that simple access, everything is a public URL. It behaves as if it was on the public internet. It's accessible from anywhere on any device. Now it just comes down to, is that the user you want and the authorization you want? If you don't want it being accessed on a tablet, that's your authorization rule. If you don't want it being accessed from outside the United States, that's fine, that's your authorization rule. But it's possible to, if you choose. So it's all about mechanism, not policy. Here's your mechanisms. You can do whatever you want with them. That becomes your policy. With respect to a local government, there's really no difference in what zero trust is. Going back to the very first thing I said, one of the reasons that local governments struggle so much with cybercrime is they have a very broad set of lines of business. There's 50 odd lines of business. There's parks and there's dog licenses and there's forestry and there's water and there's roads and there's bridges and there's permits and bylaw and so on. And every one of those has a set of systems that does their thing. But the IT department isn't sized for that number of applications. You have more applications for the organization than other organizations of like size would be. You know, a city with 1,000 workers and a manufacturing plant with 1,000 employees, the manufacturing plant's going to have 10 applications. You're going to have 100. So the strategy is not really that different. The Zero Trust is a good part of the answer for that defense in depth. It helps you eliminate the shared credentials. I know you have them. You know you have them. We don't have to talk about that. They're there somewhere. If you can do that who, what, when, that control, then you can start to do incremental adoption. You can say, I'm going to roll it out for this application first or this team first. Every time, I'm a firm proponent of perfect is the enemy of good enough. If you make something better, don't stop and think about how much better you could make it and therefore never get there. You just got to get started. That's what Agile is all about. So if you say, we'll start with that simple, the wiki or the water treatment plant. How many people use the water treatment plant? 5. Would you be pretty sad if somebody was to dump a bunch of poison in and kill everybody? Heck yeah. So maybe it's a good spot to start. The number of people that need to make a small change to their work is small. The impact is big. But other people go in the other direction. They say, the wiki, everybody uses it. The phone list, everybody uses it. That's my spot to start. There's no right answer. But incremental adoption, you want to be able to step in and say, do a little bit, stop and pause, do a little bit, stop and pause, and just keep moving. That way, you don't have to change the world all at once. So that best spot to start, I got some suggestions. My suggestions are, of course, wrong. You have your own suggestions. So it could be HVAC, building management systems, water treatment. It could be something that's a thing. It's bolted to a thing somewhere. It could be bylaw officers. They're out walking the streets with an Android phone taking pictures of license plates of who's parked somewhere and shouldn't have, and they got to be able to bring that back home. It could be your commercial vehicle operators, hours of record, driving record. It could be your seasonal workers, people that don't really work with you but kind of work with you. They're there for 3 Saturdays in the summer, and submitting timesheets is very different than they're there every day. It could be volunteers, extended teams, partners. There's no right answer other than the sooner you start, the sooner you'll get improved, the sooner you'll be happier and know what to do next. So what resources can you secure with Zero Trust? The reality is anything that's a network resource, anything that has some ability to be accessed over a network. A lot of things can be and haven't in the past, but in our personal lives we've been kind of woken up to it. It used to be the thermostat in your grandma's house. It was that Honeywell Lyric, and you rotated the dial and your mom would yell at you for changing the temperature. And then suddenly along the way you bought a thing from NIST or whatever, and it was on the internet and you didn't really think about it, and you could use it from anywhere in the world. The same is true in your organization. There's a lot of stuff that has an IP address that you might think about. It only gets used locally, but it can be used in anger from a remote, so you may as well use it for good for remote. But that operational technology, the PLC, the door lock, the security cameras, the water treatment plant, that shared drive, it's the bread and butter of every business. There's a directory somewhere called timesheets or resumes or new photos for the website or something, and that's how ransomware spreads. But by making it web accessible for only specific users and having an audit trail, there's no ransomware. Even if they plug in the world's worst USB key they found in the parking lot into their PC, they blow their PC up, sure, but they didn't get back into your network. Custom applications. Every one of you has got some pet project that was written in PHP or Angular or JavaScript or something, and is doing something for your business along the way with shadow IT, and nobody really knows how to get that to participate in a single sign-on. This is a good spot. And who is the right person? Really anybody with a pulse. They got to get their job done. They got to get it done securely. You need them to use multi-factor. Let's make that an easy experience for them. So with that, I will open up for questions. I think I got a great solution to this. My team would love to talk to you. If you got any comments after this, you can email me, don@agilicus.com. The good, the bad, the ugly. You can type questions in the chat if you have them. We'll follow up afterwards with the pithy video with my complete lack of jokes in it that I promised. But yeah, we're just looking for input, advice. We're looking to help. We can explain some of the case studies that we've done with others. Some of them are published on our website. And like I said, each of our customers, they're not giant IT organizations with thousands of people. They're just small shops that have a lot of different tasks on the go, and we help them get something simple done quickly for not a lot of money. So with that, I'll pause for the awkward couple of minutes to see if there are any questions.